Good evening, saints, and shalom, and welcome to this episode of the Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you guys that we are indeed living in biblical times, and it continues to be more and more true every day, which is why it is incredibly unfortunate that I have a nasty habit of constantly taking a hiatus from this program because obviously there's so much to report. I could never try to keep up with it after the fact at this point, but I can do the best I can, and that's what we're doing here today. Hopefully starting a new era of not being a total loser and actually getting you guys consistent content here on the Synagogue News. But at any rate, I appreciate anybody who is here. If you are here, please remember to like and share this video and consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit the bell to get notified every time that we go live or anytime we post any content after that. Also, remember, if you have any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, anything of that nature, you can put them either in the live chat, and we will try to answer questions at the end of the program, or you can put them in the comment section down below. Also would like to suggest to you guys, if you'd like to support the work that we do here, you can subscribe to our Patreon. I have a Synagogue News specific Patreon, and it actually will also give you access to my bi-weekly political blog called Bloglodite, where, of course, once every other Saturday, we post blog entries on various topics surrounding politics, society, culture, and economics. So if you guys are interested in any of that, please do consider subscribing. It's $5 for the access. You can give as much or as little as you like, but the tier that actually gives you access to the Bloglodite entries is minimum of $5. So if anybody's interested in that, please do let me know. I'll be sure to provide links to that. Our blog coming up is going to be an expose on former porn star Mia Khalifa. And you may be wondering, why bother doing an expose on a former porn star? She's literally a former porn star. What could you possibly have to expose? And that's a good question. The long and short of it is when she quote unquote retired, I put quotes there because it's all a lie. You'll have to actually get the Bloglodite membership in order to see what I mean. But nevertheless, when she quote unquote retired, she became a darling of the anti-porn movement. Now, I happen to be a member of the anti-porn movement. I think that pornography is very dangerous. It's very destructive. It's incredibly destructive to women and their self-esteem. It's incredibly destructive to men for very obvious reasons. And she became kind of the poster child for the industry is abusive, and virtually everything that she said in her interviews was a lie. Me and others have pointed this out. Obviously, I'm just a nobody, but many people who are much more popular than I am have pointed this out, and yet the anti-porn movement continued to treat her as a darling, as a poster child. And so now, of course, recently she's been quite vocal in her anti-Semitism. And while I don't want to start participating in the cancel culture or anything like that, I do think it's a good time to just, for topical purposes, to get clicks, admittedly, but also those clicks are going to have something informative behind them. A good time to actually lay out all of the facts about her time here in the quote unquote industry and why she is not only a poor representative of the anti-porn movement, but also, and much more importantly, actually her presence as a poster child for us actually degrades the message, actually makes those who are on the fence or even stuck in the hellacious industry that is the porn industry, whether that be on the consuming end or the producing end, it actually causes people like this to look at this movement as fraudulent, as dishonest, as not worth their time, as a big joke, frankly. And so we're going to be posting an expose on that next Saturday. That is not Saturday the 14th. It will be Saturday the 21st. If you guys are interested in that, please do let me know. I will provide links, and you can get full access to the blog Luddite blog there. Also want to ask you guys to follow us on various social media platforms: Gab, Facebook, Twitter, Minds, Truth Social. I am on all of them. You can also find the backup for this channel on Rumble. It's only the Synagogue on Rumble. I know some of you who watch my other channel may be confused. I thought the Synagogue was your religious content. Well, it is, but unfortunately, Rumble doesn't give me the opportunity to change my name. So I initially got a Synagogue account there. And then when I decided, you know what, actually, I'm going to use this account for the political content, well, it was already too late. I'd already named it the Synagogue, and now you can't change it. But anyways, please do follow me on all those places there, especially Rumble, because YouTube really does not like conservative political content. And so there is a high likelihood that this video could get taken down, or that other videos like it could get taken down, or even this entire channel could get taken down. So if you want to be able to watch these, just make sure you're subscribed to the Rumble account as a backup. And again, anybody who wants that, just let me know. Links can be provided. All right, so the conversation that I want to have today is a somber one, not very fun, but it's one which, if you're a consistent watcher of this channel, we've been kind of expecting. And I know some of you guys may have forgotten about that because it's been a while since we posted here, but we're always talking about Israel. We're always talking about wars to come. We're always talking about temples to come. We're always talking about partition plans to come. And of course, one of those things, namely a war, has in fact come to fruition. And here we are in the year 2023. So we're going to spend the entire show and probably a lot of subsequent shows talking about this issue. It's a very big issue, in my opinion. I think it could completely change the geopolitical landscape, not just of the Levant region, not even just of the Middle East, but really of the globe. Israel, because of its two different unique statuses it has, really. The first being the Holy Land, a land which is very important to religious Jews as well as Christians and Muslims. That obviously makes it a center point in American politics and really in world politics. The second thing that makes it such a important nation, despite its very small size, it's only the square mileage of New Jersey. In fact, even if you add the West Bank and Gaza, which the West Bank is properly known as Judea and Samaria, by the by. But at any rate, even if you add Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, it's still only the size of Hawaii if you combined all of those tiny islands in Hawaii into one landmass. So it's a tiny, 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 tiny nation. But the second thing that makes it incredibly important to the geopolitical atmosphere is the fact that it is the one Western ally in arguably the most volatile region in the entire world, right? And as a result, even though, like, for example, Iran and Turkey and Russia and China, they all don't have anything to really gain by being allied with each other, except for the fact that an ally of America happens to be a major military force, a major geopolitical force in the region. And so now, Iran and Turkey hate Israel. Russia hates America. So now Russia's allied with Iran and Turkey. And Iran and Turkey don't like each other, but they also don't like the West. And so sometimes they're kind of buddy-buddy, even though sometimes they're definitely not. Same thing with China. China doesn't really care for Iran, doesn't have anything to say about the Palestinian issue. But if it means they can put themselves in opposition to the hegemony of the United States of America, then maybe supporting Iran, supporting Turkey, supporting Palestine, being against Israel is actually worth their while, right? And so on and so forth. So these two things, the fact that it's the Holy Land and the fact that it's the one Western ally in the most volatile region in the entire world, make Israel, whether you're a dispensationalist or not, whether you believe there's a coming temple or not, whether you believe that Israel has a right to exist or not, arguably one of the most, well, actually not arguably, inarguably, one of the most important nations on the planet, on the very short list of important nations on the planet. I would say really Russia, China, America, Israel, right? Those are really the big four. not in terms of influence, but just in terms of the impact they end up having on the rest of the world. Anyways, digressions aside, so I want to talk a lot about this. There's a couple things I want to address to start this program, and that is essentially a little bit of why this attack is happening. We're going to read some news articles here in a moment that will explain this further. But there is a list of reasons why this attack is taking place now, why it's taking place at all, but also specifically the dates being chosen, the brutality of it, and also what we can expect coming in the future. So if you're taking notes, note this: bullet points for the reasons for the attack, right? So the main reason given by Palestinian officials, and I put Palestinian here in air quotes because, quite frankly, there is no such thing as a Palestinian. There's no such thing as a Palestine. Palestine is a nation which has never existed. Palestinians are Arabs of the from the Levantine area. According to the Balfour Declaration of 1917, they really should be Jordanians, but nevertheless, they have adopted this non-existent culture. But I mean, try to distinguish Palestinian culture from Jordanian culture, and you will fail to do so because there is no distinctions. Really, what a Palestinian is just an Arab that wants Jewish land, frankly. But at any rate, according to so-called Palestinian sources, the reason for the attack has been the fact that this is, I guess, the deadliest year for Palestinians in the 21st century, barring active conflict like the 2006 Gaza conflict, right? So a way you could phrase that better would be this is the deadliest year of the 21st century for Palestinians outside of active military engagement between so-called Palestinian revolutionaries and the state of Israel, right? Around, give or take, I didn't get an exact number, but around 200 residents of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip have in fact been killed in the year 2023 in violence that is specifically pertaining to the Israel-Arab conflict. 200 obviously is not a huge amount, but it's not necessarily a small amount either, especially when there's no actively declared war. Some might chuckle and say, well, I mean, that's just about the amount of people who get killed in Chicago every year, right? And whether or not that's actually true, I don't 100% know, but I imagine it's at least close. But nevertheless, you're talking about two groups of people that are not actually in an active state of armed combat, and yet nevertheless 200 people have died. So you can see why this is something that is bothersome. Now, of course, there's context to this. For example, Islamic Jihad in Palestine and Hamas, two different jihadist groups fighting for so-called Palestinian liberation, have been actively shooting rockets into Israel periodically for years and years and years now, right? And very often there is retaliatory strikes against Hamas and against Islamic Jihad in Palestine, and these retaliations are what end up leading to the 200 some odd dead, right? So while it is true that this has been a particularly deadly year even before October the 7th, it is also true that there is a context behind that, one which the so-called Palestinians definitely do not want you to know about, right? There has been, excuse me, there has been, how do I put this? Suspicion that this might have the reason for this attack, or another reason for this attack, excuse me, might have something to do with the normalization of Arab-Jewish relations. For those who may not be aware, back in the Trump administration, U.S. President Donald Trump actually orchestrated the signing of what is known as the Abraham Accords, right? And actually, if you want to go to an archive of this channel, look up Abraham Accords. We did some extensive look into the Abraham Accords and what exactly they do. At any rate, there were these Abraham Accords. What they did is they were the first, or at least the first since the Camp David Accords, recognition of the state of Israel and its right to exist by a sovereign Arab nation. And in fact, it was even a couple. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Morocco. And I think Sudan might have even been involved as well, but don't quote me on Sudan there, because I might be misremembering that. But at least Qatar, at least the United Arab Emirates, and at least Morocco were part of this whole Abraham Accords ordeal, where they effectively signed peace treaties with Israel and legally recognized their right to exist. It was a very big deal, right? Since then, Israel has been trying to push forward that agenda of essentially being recognized as a legitimate state by its immediate peers. And recently, and not even just recently, but really for the last half decade, Israel has been in, well, I guess it's not half decade, it's been really 3 years. But at any rate, Israel has been in communication with, okay, sorry, I'm going back on my thought, because really it is kind of the last half decade, right? Because if you recall back in 2017, when Trump actually was first inaugurated, he went on an international tour, and he actually went from Saudi Arabia to Israel and then up to the Vatican to meet with Pope Francis. It was the first flight from Saudi Arabia to Israel in the history of either nation. And then he went immediately to the Vatican to have a closed door conversation with Pope Francis, and we still don't have a transcript for what exactly took place there. But anyways, that rant aside, back to what I was actually saying. So Israel has been trying since then, and really since the Abraham Accords in 2020, to push forward this agenda, like I said, of trying to get their neighbor states to recognize them as a legitimate nation, and specifically the state of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, I should say, as it is a monarchy, which of course is incredibly important considering the incredible significance Saudi Arabia has for the Muslim world. The first and second holiest sites in all of Islam, Mecca and Medina, are both in Saudi Arabia. In fact, Saudi Arabia is the birthplace, or at least believed birthplace, of Muhammad himself. It's where he grew up. It's where he started preaching his message. It's where he spent his time in exile. It's where he led his armies from when he eventually started conquering the Arabian Peninsula. It's where Arabs come from. If you go really, really far back, like well before Muhammad, even in fact, well before the establishment of the Davidic kingdom, they're really native to the northern region of the peninsula. But that, of course, is still in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia also is the only functional Islamic state. Now, I want to clarify what I mean by that. Number one, with that word functional, Saudi Arabia is very rich. They have a decent amount of military power. Their citizens, while they are not living like Americans, are certainly not living like Somalis either. And it's stable. There's not revolutions constantly. There's not, attempts at coup d'etats. There's not terrorist groups going out bombing every mosque, this way or this side of China, right? It's a stable, functioning nation where law and order tend to prevail. Now, of course, that comes with a great deal of consequence, but this is not a expose on all the terrors that the Saudi Arabian government inflicts upon its own subjects. But nevertheless, so that clarifies the word functional. The second word I want to clarify there is Islamic, and I don't just mean Islamic majority, like the majority of the people who live there are Muslims. What I mean is it's actually part of the state structure, the governmental structure, right? Saudi Arabia is a theocracy. In other words, there are other theocracies and even other Islamic theocracies, most popular of which is Iran. But Iran is a pariah state, right? Iran is a backwater country that's not very technologically advanced, that's subject to rolling blackouts constantly. It's kind of a joke of a nation, for lack of a better term. And Saudi Arabia is not. Saudi Arabia has frequent dialogues with some of the most powerful men in the entire world. The United States president very often is, and in fact, every president since I think Richard Nixon has spoken with the reigning monarch in Saudi Arabia at some point in time. Excuse me. Saudi Arabia, of course, is a business partner with the United States of America, as well as with many different first world nations and other such powerful nations across the world. Saudi Arabia is something of a kind of ally of America-ish. I mean, what exactly does the word ally mean when you don't have a formal alliance with somebody? Or that's a good question, but it's sort of an ally. I mean, when they were threatened by Saddam Hussein back in 1991 when he moved into Kuwait, there's other reasons we invaded Iraq at that point as well, one of which was the liberation of Kuwait. But one of the big reasons for us even going to war in Operation Desert Storm in the first place was because the Saudis were worried that Saddam might threaten them. It seemed like Saddam was trying to go on a oil pillaging spree. The reason he wanted Kuwait in the first place was to take some of the most rich oil reserves in the world. Some of those same very rich oil reserves are found in the same region of Saudi Arabia, namely the northeastern area that would border Kuwait, right, and also border Iraq even. So Saudi Arabia is not Iran, in other words. It's the only functional Islamic state in the world, right? And that's on top of its historic significance and its religious significance. So this is all a long way, and I hope it's a coherent way that's making sense. This is all a long way of me explaining Saudi Arabia is a very important nation, both to the Arab world and to the greater Muslim world, right? Which is not one and the same thing. It's a huge player in in the Middle East. It's arguably the second most powerful nation in the Middle East, depending on if you would place Israel one, and also depending on if one wanted to make an argument that Turkey might be more powerful, which is totally legitimate case. You could also make a good argument for Egypt, but I digress. And Israel was seemingly getting relatively close to a formal recognition, a formal treaty with Saudi Arabia. Now, whether or not you agree with Israel doing this or not is not the point. I've been quite clear on this channel that I am very skeptical of the Israeli-Saudi Arabian relations. I also kind of get why they want to do it. So, I go back and forth. But nevertheless, none of that is actually the point. The point is, it was happening, and other Arab nations had already recognized Israel's right to exist, already recognized Israel as a sovereign nation, and already had formal treaties with the state of Israel, which in and of itself is a de facto recognition of their legitimacy to rule the region, right? And obviously, the so-called Palestinians do not like that. They don't appreciate that. Historically, as of the last 75 some odd years, they could rely upon the sovereign Arab nations in the Middle East to be constant critics, constant condemners, constant threats to Israeli sovereignty, right? They could count on them to be supporters of the so-called Palestinian cause for a quote-unquote liberation, which really is just a fancy way of saying they want the country that we today call Israel, right? So Palestine doesn't like that. Hamas especially doesn't like that because Hamas, unlike the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, unlike the PLO, Hamas is not simply a so-called Palestinian Liberation Army. It's also a Islamic jihadist movement, right? It's, in other words, it's analogous to ISIS, Al Qaeda, Al Nusra Front, which is really just ISIS in Africa. But anyways. No, sorry. Al Nusra Front is not the one in Africa. Boko Haram was the one in Africa. Al Nusra Front was in Syria. Anyways, not the point. The point is this makes, when Hamas sees Saudi Arabia being buddy-buddy with Israel, all the Palestinians are disappointed, but Hamas being, in its own mind at least, fighting for Islam, is particularly offended, right? And so a lot of people have suspected that perhaps a big part of the reason why this conflict is taking place now is to try and, number one, throw a monkey wrench in this whole Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Israel general Arab world becoming buddy-buddy, the situation that we got going on here. But also, number two, to kind of force Arab nations to take a side. Hey, we're going to go to war. Israel's about to have a very violent response. So are you going to be for us, or are you going to be for the Jews? Right? And while I cringe to say this, I must say it's an intelligent strategy. If it works. If it doesn't work, you're going to, of course, have a whole lot of risk you took for virtually no gain. In fact, it's possible this could be the end of a semi-autonomous Gaza Strip as we know it. But if it were to work, it would actually, well, and really even because, if it's going to work, then it was intelligent, right? It's like, oh, well, duh. But even beyond that, it is a gamble that if how would I want to put this? If you're at the craps table or at some casino or something like that, if you're making bets, in other words, this is not the worst bet to make. In fact, Jordan, the country of Jordan, has already said that they are in support of the so-called Palestinians in this conflict. This is a direct quote from the Jordanian king. He says, quote, "We will not deviate from defending the just cause of the Palestinian people until they regain their full rights." Jordan is officially supportive of Palestine, right? That, of course, was not the case October the 6th. But post October the 7th, Palestine forced their hand. And how many other nations are also going to be supportive of the Hamas terrorists and of everything that's going on there? We don't know. Is it possible also that this attack could provoke a sort of alliance between the PLO and Hamas? The PLO historically has kind of kept a safe distance from Hamas, not wanting to be considered radicals. Now, whether or not they are is not the point. I tend to think that they definitely are. But nevertheless, they're at least a secular group, and Hamas obviously is not, right? Hamas is a jihadist group. They are Islamic terrorists just as much as they are Palestinian fighters, right? So not only can this be said to be somewhat retaliatory due to the fact that Israel is retaliating to rocket attacks into their borders, but this could also be potentially due to the fact that Israel is signing these Abraham Accords, is in talks with Saudi Arabia, and is indeed in talks with many Muslim nations and many Arab nations in a way that has never happened in modern history. And really, you could say never happened in history at all, because back when Israel was a sovereign nation before 1948, the Hasmonean dynasty, or even the Bar Kokhba rule, especially the Davidic kingdom, right? There was no sovereign Arab nation. There were many different Arab tribes, and some of them would be allies, and some of them wouldn't. And some of them would have relations, and some of them wouldn't, right? But there was no unified Arab nation until the 600s AD. So really, this is the first time in history that any of these talks have taken place, at least at this scale. Again, we did have the Camp David Accords, which Jimmy Carter helped to usher in. So that's another potential reason for this attack taking place. The date is incredibly significant. October the 7th on the American calendar, or the Western calendar, the Gregorian calendar is what I'm trying to say, right, is the day in which Hamas decided to attack. Well, that happens to be 50 years and a day after a coalition of Arab nations attacked Israel in 1973 in what has been historically known as the Yom Kippur War, because the attack took place on the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, which, by the way, was only a couple of weeks ago. It wasn't that long ago. But nevertheless, on the Gregorian calendar, this attack takes place 50 years and a day after the attack of this Arab alliance against Israel in 1973. And it was a surprise attack, much like this one was. It was an attack which ultimately ended in Israeli victory, but at the beginning it was not seeming like it would be so. In fact, many people would consider Richard Nixon's, decision to militarily support, by way of giving them equipment, Israel to be vital in their very survival at that time, because they were surrounded on all sides. The nations which had attacked them were Egypt and Syria. I believe Jordan might have been involved, but I'm not sure. There was a lot of expeditionary forces from Morocco, from Kuwait, from Saudi Arabia, Algeria, so on and so forth, Iraq, right? I think, actually, you know what? I don't think Jordan was involved. I think Jordan decided to not be involved because of how disastrous the Six-Day War, only 6 years earlier, was for them. But I digress. This is 50 years and a day after that, and that is intentional. At least our best intelligence at the moment suggests that that is intentional, meant to evoke the memory of that attack, which took place 50 years ago, and say, hey, Arab world, let's do this again, but stronger, better, faster, quicker, tougher, etc. Right? Let's actually throw Israel into the sea, as the Hamas charter says, which we'll read here in just a moment. On the Jewish calendar, October the 7th was a holiday. In fact, it's technically two holidays. The first is known as Simchat Torah. It is the ending and beginning of the yearly Torah cycle. So for those who are not familiar with Jewish religion, there is a yearly Torah cycle, right, where you read small portions of the Torah. That is the first 5 books of the Protestant Old Testament. And you read small portions of this book every day, all throughout the year, up until, of course, Simchat Torah, where you'll be ending it and then also beginning it, right, as you repeat the cycle again and again and again and again. So this is why you'll hear people say, this is your daily or this is your weekly Torah portion, because that's the portion that you're reading in this point in the year on the cycle. It's actually, the thing that's really cool about it, I must note, is because of this cycle, Jews all over the world who are religious are actually reading the same parts of the Bible at the same time, despite not talking to each other, right? So Jews in China, Jews in New York City, and Jews in Jerusalem will all be reading the same books of the Torah, or the same verses in the Torah, on October the 12th. And they'll be reading the same on October the 13th and October the 14th, and so on and so forth, right? So it's very cool in that regard. But anyways, because of the fact that it's Simchat Torah, that, of course, means that Israel is distracted, busy having this celebration. And besides that, it was also the 8th day of the assembly. That is the 8th day of the Jewish holiday Sukkot, which is kind of like their version of Thanksgiving. If I'm being very, very, very general, if you want to know more about it, check out my other channel. I have whole videos on Sukkot. But at any rate, they call it the separate but related holiday, and it's called Shemini Atzeret. Oh my goodness, I cannot pronounce this word. Sorry, Atzeret. Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of the assembly, right? And this is the big celebration, the big spiritual celebration of the 8-day holiday that is Sukkot. Although technically it's 7-day holiday plus the 8th day. Like I said, it's separate but related, and I want to go into details about what exactly Sukkot is. But the fact is, Simchat Torah and Shemini Atzeret were both taking place on this day, October the 7th, on our calendar, right? That is, I believe, Tishrei the 23rd on the Jewish calendar, if I remember correctly. And so all of Israel's distracted, right? So you're not only calling upon, on the Gregorian calendar, the Yom Kippur War that took place 50 years ago, getting almost on the 50-year anniversary, but you're also hitting Israel at a time when they are distracted, which ironically is exactly what happened during the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur is the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. Virtually everything in Israel is shut down every Yom Kippur, even amongst those who are secular and don't actually follow the religious practices. And so they caught them off guard. It's the exact same thing that took place this time, right? They caught them off guard. They were busy celebrating a holiday, celebrating a holy day, if you're religious or not. And it happens to coincide with the 50-year anniversary of the Yom Kippur War attack, right? So those are almost assuredly not coincidences. There's virtually no major intelligence figure in either the United States or Israel who has said that you can chalk that up to coincidence. It's believed to be very deliberate. Of course, there is the obvious answers for why this is taking place. Things like the Hamas charter and the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli dispute. Obviously, numerous peace plans have been offered throughout time, the most recent being in the waning months of the Trump administration. Trump, with help of his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, had proposed a peace plan. And actually, let me show you a picture of what that peace plan would end up entailing. Basically, all of Israel proper, as well as Jerusalem, and the areas which are currently populated in Judea and Samaria, commonly known as the West Bank, by Jews, would be considered Israel, and then the rest of the region would be considered Palestine. And so it was a two-state solution, but anyways, I want to show you the actual. Here we go. All right, share screen. Boom, and then let me go ahead and click on this image. All right, so all of the green here would be, under this peace plan, a Palestinian state. This is, again, the Trump-Kushner peace plan, right? This is the last attempt thus far at a two-state solution. It was rejected. You can kind of see why it was rejected. The Judea and Samaria region, commonly known as the West Bank, obviously all these brown spots in it would be considered to be a part of that region. But also, if you can see my cursor, the region would kind of fill up this point here. You can see there's all this brown in between the border of Israel, Jordan, and the green that would make up the prospective Palestinian state. All of that is part of that in-between part is part of Judea, Samaria, commonly known as the West Bank, right? And so the so-called Palestinians, they want that. They want all this brown that's internal. So they want the entire region that we call Judea, Samaria, right? And of course, all of Gaza they would get, but that isn't really the big problem that they have here. And in fact, if you're really, both Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas have been quite clear that they think that Israel should be an Arab nation. But nevertheless, that's not even the point. This tunnel right here, you can see West Bank Gaza tunnel, was meant to connect the two. And the whole point of this was, again, to make peace. Well, it was rejected. Israel said no, or excuse me, Palestine said no, we're not interested. And so the dispute remains unresolved thus far. And so that's an obvious reason why this is taking place, right? It's just not yet resolved. Excuse me. The other thing here that's incredibly important is the fact that Hamas's charter has always been highly anti-Semitic and, in fact, highly anti-Israel, right? It's called the Hamas Covenant. It was made in 1988 when Hamas was actually founded. We might do a whole breakdown on this at some point, as well as a breakdown on Hamas and who they are. But to give you a direct quote from it, it says, quote, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it, just as it obliterated the others before it. And this is a quotation directly from the preamble, right? The preamble of the Hamas Covenant, I mean. To give you another quotation from it very quickly, the land of Palestine is an Islamic waqif, that is a holy possession, consecrated for future Muslim generations until Judgment Day. No one can renounce it or any part, or abandon it or any part of it. This is from Article 11. Here's a quotation from Article 13. Palestine is an Islamic land. Since this is the case, the liberation of Palestine is an individual duty for every Muslim wherever he may be, end quote. Um, the most egregious area of this actually comes from Article 7. One of the things that the world at large doesn't like to tell you is that this is actually a direct quotation from the Hadith. And that is, quote, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. That is a quotation from Article 7 of the Hamas covenant. And like I said, at some point soon, we will probably read the entire Hamas covenant, not tonight, but I think a future episode of excuse me, the Watchdog will probably be on that topic. Now, this, as I said, is a direct quotation from a hadith narrated by Abu Huraira, which says the last hour won't come before the Muslims would fight the Jews and the Muslims will kill the Jews. So Jews would hide behind rocks and trees. And the trees will say, Muslim, Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. And then it's got this very weird part where there's this specific tree that just decides, well, no, actually, we're not going to fight the Jews. And it's because it's the Jewish tree. I don't know. It's real weird. And when we do a full breakdown of the Muslim covenant, we will, or excuse me, of the Hamas covenant, we will also show you guys that quotation from Abu Hariri. But nevertheless, that's another one of the obvious reasons why this is taking place. Not only do you have the ongoing Palestinian issue, you also have the fact that this is just an integral part of Hamas and why it even exists in the first place. It is anti-Semitic and anti-Israel to its core. It believes that the entire land of Israel belongs to Muslims. It believes that it is a Muslim consecrated site. It believes that the presence of infidels in this site is in and of itself an offense, and it believes that it is the duty of Muslims to exterminate the Jews, a la Adolf Hitler in the 1933 party that I can't actually mention, although I guess I just said his name, so maybe this video gets taken down. Anyways, I don't know. YouTube rules are stupid. At any rate, so this is a long laundry list of reasons why this war is taking place, right? It's, you have the fact that there's this holiday, you have the fact that this is the 50-year anniversary of Yom Kippur, you have the fact that there's this ongoing Palestinian dispute, you have the Hamas Charter, you have the normalization of Arab-Jew relations, which the Palestinians very much do not approve of, and you have this attempt to rally Muslims and Arabs around the cause of Palestine to spark a mass invasion of Israel. Basically, if we can get Israel to retaliate in a violent enough fashion, then perhaps we can get Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and etc. to attack Israel, or at the very least condemn and pull out of relations with Israel, right? There is actually, however, one more thing I want, actually two more things. I did forget to mention that Israel is currently distracted with a big issue as far as the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu has been frequently charged with bribery. He's not very popular at the moment. He's a very, very delicate hold on power at the moment, and it is believed by many to be the hope of Hamas that they might be able to cause this unity government to split. On top of that, the fact is they are just simply distracted with this, as well as distracted with spikes in violence which have taken place in Judea and Samaria, as well as on the northern border with Lebanon, which you can kind of see the map here, right? Obviously, Gaza's here, Judea, Samaria is here, so you have all the troops amassed here, but then you also have Lebanon, which is up here, right? So you got troops amassed here, you got troops amassed here. You don't really worry about dinky old Gaza, and so there's distraction, right? There is one other thing, though, that we have not yet mentioned, which is incredibly important to why this fight is taking place, and that is the recent Temple Mount disputes, which have been taking place. And indeed, there is a lot of them. For those who are not familiar, the Temple Mount is the holiest site in all of Judaism. It is believed to be the spot where both Solomon's temple and the second Jewish temple stood. Currently, the Western Wall stands there, which is the holiest site in all of Judaism. And the third holiest site in Islam is also there, namely the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, right? Actually, it's the same thing. But nevertheless, it is believed to be the place where Muhammad ascended into heaven by Muslims. So it is a very important place for both groups. As I said, it is the holiest site in all of Judaism and the third holiest site in all of Islam. You can kind of see that reflected in the charter that we were just reading. Now, I want to show you, this is just a Google search for Temple Mount, how many news articles, and we're actually going to read this one here from PBS, but nevertheless, how many news articles here have been published recently, even before the war, which right now a lot of these are post-war, but we'll get there in a second, about Al-Aqsa to kind of give you, or excuse me, the Temple Mount, to kind of give you an idea of this also being a big part of the problem. Now, I want to say this cannot be the sole cause of the problem, because the coordination and planning it would have taken to actually carry out the attack against Israel, which was recently carried out, demonstrates for us that this had been planned for quite some time. And in fact, we now know a lot about the intelligence failures of Mossad and of the government of Israel in general, which has informed us that, yes, actually, this was being planned for many months. But it became something that was much more vital, right? Or much more, how would you say this, pressing to Hamas recently because of stories which had been taking place. Now, this here is even after the fact, but you can kind of see the point. Hardline Jewish settlers stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound on Wednesday as Israel escalated its bombing of the Gaza Strip. Wednesday would have been yesterday, although I guess it would have been 2 days ago from their perspective, because they're something like 12 hours ahead of us. At any rate, just kind of skip over these for a minute because I want to go to some of the older ones. See, this is before. Israeli man attempts to sacrifice sheep on Temple Mount. This is before, you can see this a week ago. This is before October the 7th, when all of this was taking place. We'll be reading that here in just a moment. Jerusalem Post again. Over 1,400 Jews visit Temple Mount. Palestinians threaten response. This, of course, again, is before the October the 7th attack that just recently took place. Let's go to the next article here. Jordan, Saudi Arabia slam Jewish visits to Temple Mount during Rosh Hashanah. This is 3 weeks ago, right? So again, more news about this Temple Mount coming out before the initial conflict took place. A month ago, don't let Saudis have any role on the Temple Mount, put Israel in charge, an opinion piece from the Jerusalem Post. And again, that was 1 month ago. Also a month ago, from Israel Hayom, the internal Islamic struggle over the Temple Mount is once again on the agenda. April 25th of 2023, what to know about Jerusalem's Temple Mount and the status quo agreement. A week ago, from Haaretz, Egyptian mediators continued Jewish ascent to Temple Mount will lead to escalation. This article is pre-escalation, right? Now, is Egypt warning or is Egypt threatening? I think it's more likely they were actually warning, although they are certainly not happy with what was taking place either. But nevertheless, you can get the point. This is 2 weeks ago. I-24 News, again, before the attack that took place only 5 days ago. Record crowds expected at Temple Mount during Sukkot celebrations. Okay, so you're starting, I hope, to get the point. And by the way, not today, because we've already been going almost an hour, but we're going to be continuously covering this topic. We're going to read basically all these articles, right? This is, I think, the point which, while some people are talking about it, it is not being discussed nearly as much as all the other reasons which I gave you. A big part of the reason for this attack and for its taking place now is because of the recent quarrels, for lack of a better term, that have been taking place over the Temple Mount region. And by the way, you can see that in the name of the operation. Obviously, it's originally in Arabic, but the operation, Hamas's codenamed the operation that is this attack on Israel, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Well, Al-Aqsa is the Muslim name for the Temple Mount, right? It's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So you can see this reflected even in their code name. This is a huge part of the reason for the fight taking place, right? And again, this is a brief overview of everything. We're going to be doing more and more looks at this, at all these articles here, specifically the ones that were pre-invasion very soon. But nevertheless, you can see just from all these news articles, Jerusalem Post and Israel Hayom and Haaretz and the Times of Israel, right? This had been a sticking point between the two of them in the weeks leading up to this. In fact, in the months leading up to this, and it's very obvious to see the reason why Israel is offended that the Muslims seem to have complete control, or at least many in Israel are offended. I should rephrase that. The Muslims have control over their holiest site because their third holiest site happens to be on top of it. And you can understand the sentiment, right? I mean, if I went and blew up the what do you call that thing, the Kaaba in Mecca, and placed a church there and said, this isn't even my favorite church, it's my third favorite church, you could see Muslims being offended at that, reasonably so, right? But anyways, I do want to read this article here, here, from PBS, which does kind of do a little bit of explaining. Oh, not chill. Not chill. I need to save stuff when I'm reading it because I never know if I won't be able to read it again. Lame? Totally lame. All right, PBS is apparently taking down the article, so we can't read it. Well, that sucks. That was the point of this show that I was going to, or the part of this, that was going to be the point of this part of the show. So, sorry about that, friends. Moving on. There is some other stuff I want to share with you guys. That, of course, was the reason for the attack. I do want to go over some of the reasons for the failure on Israel's part. A lot of people are wondering, how is it possible that the nation that has, some believe, the most advanced intelligence network on the planet, and by the way, that is according to many of the members of the intelligence community in our own country, how is it that they failed at this, right? And there is many reasons why. So first off, there is the aforementioned distractions we had already talked about. There is an over-reliance on technology at the Gaza border, right? There's not a lot of people who are actually armed and manning the border. Rather, there is a lot of cameras and automated machine guns and drones and stuff like that meant to keep an eye out on the border, so that soldiers can be used elsewhere. There was a certain level of arrogance on the Israeli part that cannot be denied. They had gotten to a point now where they really weren't taking Hamas seriously. There was also this feeling that Hamas was actually willing to, recently you always hear this, well, if we just gave them more supplies and economic aid, then they would be nicer and they wouldn't want to kill us. And Israel actually has been trying that. Well, a lot of people have been talking about that, but Israel has actually been trying that over the last 3 to 4 years. And it has not worked, as you can see. Something like 1,200 Jewish civilians have been killed thus far, and of course that death toll is definitely a undercount because it's just the nature of the conflict, right? You're not going to know exactly how many people have died for quite some time. There is the disunited government we were already talking about. There was this idea amongst or at least it is alleged that there was this idea amongst the Netanyahu cabinet that they wanted to pit Hamas against Fatah, which is the main political entity in the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and that pitting them against each other, it's kind of like the concept of feudalism, right? Pitting them against each other would mean that neither one of them was strong enough to fight you, which that, if that was in fact, because that's alleged, we don't know if that's actually true. If that was in fact the plan of Netanyahu, it obviously went very well. Sarcasm aside, of course, it did not work. There was some really dumb decisions made, like ignoring the Egyptian warning that things were about to escalate and concentrating all officers in the Gaza border region in the same place, so that when Hamas was able to attack that place, the Gaza border soldiers were effectively headless. And so on and so forth. And we'll get more into that stuff in the future episodes. Like I said, we're going to be covering this a lot in future episodes. But this is just general overview of some of the stuff that is actually happening, or some of the reasons for the failure, rather. The last thing I want to end this video with, and our next video will be much, much, much more detailed, but I just wanted to get a lot of my thoughts initially out, okay, is what this means for you, the American, right? Because regardless of if you support Israel's right to exist or not, fact is, you don't live there. Regardless of if you think we should be supporting Israel financially, militarily, what have you, or not, you don't live there. Regardless of, whether or not you think Zionism is legitimate, or whether you're like me and believe in nationalism for all nations or not, again, you don't live there. So how does this impact you where you actually do live as an American, right? And for those of my audience who are in Canada or other nations, this is obviously not pertaining to you, but it might be relevant. Well, first off, we can confirm as of this moment that 27 American citizens have been killed by Hamas in this conflict. Okay, 27 Americans have been killed by Hamas in this conflict in the days since October the 7th. That is at this point confirmed. Thus far, the Biden administration has not decided that they are going to do anything retaliatory about that. There are a couple reasons that have been given for this, and I'll get to that in a moment. But nevertheless, 27 Americans, like I said, have been confirmed killed in this conflict. A total of 14 Americans are currently unaccounted for. So that means we don't know if they're kidnapped. We don't know if they're dead. We don't know if they're home. We don't know if they're missing. We just don't know, right? They are unaccounted for, and that's just as much information as we can give you on those 14 at the moment. At this current time, whether or not America will give aid is an interesting question. But at this current time, we actually can't give aid because, and you may be aware of this, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, has recently had a little bit of a coup against him. Not a literal coup, of course. This is just a political coup. But the House Republicans are currently working on electing a new Speaker of the House. Now, earlier today, it was a battle between Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan. Steve Scalise was the official nominee, and Jim Jordan was the one many supported. As of a couple hours ago, Steve Scalise has decided that he will, in fact, not be the House Majority Leader. He's resigned, or he's withdrawn his candidacy. So it's possible that the House could end up electing Jim Jordan, but he needs 217 votes in order to be the House Majority Leader. So we'll see if that ends up happening. Until it does, until there is a House Majority Leader elected and doing his due duties, the United States government cannot actually give financial aid or even do anything as simple as pass a resolution against the Hamas, condemning the Hamas attacks. The executive can, but the executive doesn't really carry much weight in that regard. Although the executive is capable of giving weaponry and stuff like that, so that it's not completely useless. But as far as us giving them like a financial package or sending them a mass amount of weapons, or even, like I said, having a condemnation of Hamas's actions, that actually can't take place at this point in time. So, well, I know a lot of you probably wanted to get into the debate. Okay, well, are we going to, or are we not? Should we not? It's actually not even relevant yet because we can't until that problem is solved. The Biden administration has said there is absolutely no plan for American boots on the ground, at least not at this time. Of course, nobody can predict the future, so if this escalates, we'll see. But at this time, they have categorically rejected the idea that American soldiers will be fighting in Israel. The Israeli government itself has also said they really don't want foreign boots on the ground. And they are fully confident that they should be able to handle this themselves, which is good because while I am very supportive of Israel, like I said, I would consider myself a nationalist for all nations, and that included in that would be the fact that I am an ardent Zionist. But I still don't think it's a good idea for America to be meddling in a bunch of people's wars, regardless of if I support your right to exist or not. I support Ukraine's right to exist, and I don't think that it's a good idea for us to have American soldiers in Ukraine, right? Same thing would apply here. So I'm glad that both the Israeli and American government, at least at this time, have agreed that that is not on the table. But nevertheless, yeah, that's something there. Many people have been talking about the $6 billion that the Biden administration unfroze. It was $6 billion in financial aid that was supposed to be given to Iran. Biden unfroze it, which means that it is at least theoretically possible now for Iran to use it, but they put a whole bunch of stipulations on what they can and cannot use. A lot of people have thought, hey, does that have anything to do with this? And the answer is no. The answer is no. I know a lot of you are probably thinking that, that you're probably wanting me to say something different. Obviously, I'm deeply conservative, and many of my audience are also deeply conservative. And so it's always nice to have some brownie points against, or it's not some brownie points, some attacking points against the current administration. The fact of the matter is all $6 billion are accounted for right now. None of it has left the bank in Qatar. None of it has been used by Iran in any capacity, which means none of it has been used to fund Hamas. Now, that is not to say that Iran is not in some sense involved. For example, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has said that he is very confident that Iran is involved in some capacity in this fight, and Iran definitely does support Hezbollah, which is another terrorist organization in Lebanon, which has vowed to actually attack Israel using this as pretext. But the $6 billion that was unfrozen is completely accounted for. None of it has left the bank in Qatar. It just simply has not been used in this conflict. And for honesty's sake, we should just not use that as a talking point. Oh, well, the Biden administration unfroze $6 billion, and now Israel's being attacked. Completely unrelated. They are not connected to each other. If you care about honesty, just please toss that talking point to the side. It's not a good one. America has moved a couple of carriers right off of the coast of Israel. Excuse me. So that is something to keep an eye on. What exactly that means, we don't necessarily know, but nevertheless, they are massive aircraft carriers, and we have moved them to be directly off the coast of Israel, which, at least in theory, means that there could be some preparation for a strike of some kind. The administration says that this is a deterrent from escalation in a non-proportional manner, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I tend to think it's probably meant to deter other nations from getting involved, right? And the admiral, I forget his name, but the admiral of the U.S. Navy did speak today and say pretty much that is exactly the case. And I'm sorry that I'm having a brain fart at the moment, but I can't remember his name off the top of my head. It'll come to me here in a moment, but it'll probably be right after I shut this show down, and so it's not going to help you guys at all. At any rate, so it's likely that the reason for that being there is to deter Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Iran, etc., from ganging up on Israel. To basically the idea of like, America will threaten you. And I mean that in a more literal sense, I guess, if you decide to do this, right? So that's something to keep an eye on. As far as Americans who are currently in Israel, the Biden administration has organized charter flights out of Israel to get them back home. There is no plans at this time to go into Israel and extract them ourselves, whether that be those in Israel proper who just want to get out because the region is clearly exploding, or those who are kidnapped by Hamas. I don't have a solid number for you, but we do know at least some American citizens are currently being held hostage by Hamas. At this time, there is no plan to extract those hostages from Hamas. Do with that information what you will. I get it in the sense that, you know, when we had hostage extraction from Afghanistan, the idea was there's no government in Afghanistan to free these hostages for us. And the administration has faith in Israel as our ally and as a powerful nation to be able to extract those hostages themselves. I understand that. And I also don't know if I agree. It's a dicey subject because if you do, I mean, that violates the notion of putting boots on the ground, right? And so if you don't want boots on the ground, you don't do hostage extractions, because that's how you do a hostage extraction, is by putting boots on the ground, right? And then there's the, you know, okay, well, did you just effectively declare war on Hamas yourself, even if you didn't do so legitimately through Congress and all that kind of stuff, right? At the same time, though, there is hostages there. It does seem like perhaps a stronger president would be able to force the issue at the minimum. And I kind of hate it. I'm not gonna lie. It seems to me like they are American citizens. We should be doing everything within our power to get them back. I understand having faith in the Israeli army. However, the Israeli army is the army of Israel, right? They are interested in protecting their own borders and freeing their own hostages, as they should be, by the way. That's not a criticism. But that means American citizens, or any other citizens who are there, because some Canadians have been taken as well, they take a back seat to Israeli citizens. And again, that's not even a criticism of Israel. That's you watching out for your own. But if that's true, and we're refusing to watch out for our own because we have some delusions that Israel is going to care for our citizens as much as they care for their own, well, then we just have American citizens who are left by the wayside, having been kidnapped by Hamas. And I don't even know what to do about that, because like I said, I don't want America involved in foreign wars. I do not want that. I support Israel's right to exist. And I think that it's not, they need to be capable of maintaining their own self-existence without foreign intervention. I think they can. In fact, many on the right wing of Israel will tell you that Israel's constant reliance on America, effectively making it the 51st state, is kind of a crutch, and it weakens the state. And they give an example of in 1981 when the weapons that Saddam Hussein was producing were bombed by Israeli fighter jets in a preemptive strike, and Ronald Reagan said, hey, you're not allowed to do that. And Israel, because they were going to get that lovely fix of sweet legal tender, said, all right, fine, then we won't. You know, obviously any more than we already have, because they already carried out some. So they're actually more capable of taking it out without America constantly breathing down their neck, which works for us very well, because we also don't have our soldiers or our money going to that region, right? But it is a dicey situation. Anyways, the point is, there is no plan to extract American hostages at this time. Other than charter flights out of Israel, there is no plan to directly extract American citizens from Israel proper at this time. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and President Joe Biden have both given their unequivocal support to Israel. Whatever that means beyond mere words, I don't know, because there's just not been anything to come about from that yet. Biden has said that he wants to make sure Israel's response is proportional. In other words, that they don't overreact. I kind of think that's a stupid statement, to be honest with you, because when you have 1,200 Israeli civilians being slaughtered randomly and you know, mass rapes and tortures and stuff like that, proportional response would be turning the opposing nation into a parking lot, in my own opinion. And I would hope if some country did that to America, that we would have a leader who was willing to say, to hell with this proportional response nonsense. At the same time, I do recognize that, Hamas is not the whole of the Arab population in Israel. Obviously, there are many innocent civilians there, and Israel should fight within acceptable civilized frameworks, even if they are retaliating in a very ferocious fashion. Blinken has said that unity is the only path forward, specifically referring to the Abraham Accords style unity. In other words, he has been trying to say this is an example of why we should have Arab-Saudi relations, why we should have, Israel-Saudi relations, and just generally Jewish-Arab relations, why the two need to come together as one. I have a lot of very strong opinions on that, but we're going to save that for another episode. Right now, I'm just trying to give you guys the facts. Blinken has said that much. Besides that, as far as America is concerned, there is really not much to report, right? Again, 27 Americans have been killed. There are American hostages. 14 are unaccounted for. There was no plan to extract Americans from Israel proper at this time. There is no plan to extract American hostages from Hamas's grip at this time. It is not even possible for us to give aid or condemnations or anything of that nature at this time, at least up until a House majority leader is elected. The $6 billion that was unfrozen given to Iran is accounted for. Not a cent has been spent, and it has nothing to do with this conflict. America has moved some of its aircraft carriers off the coast of Israel in a show of solidarity with Israel and a show of force, trying to tell other nations, hey, stay away. There is no plan for boots on the ground in America at the moment, and the administration is calling for proportional responses on the part of the Israelis, as well as greater Arab-Jewish unity, but has nevertheless declared its unequivocal support for the state of Israel at this time. So that is where we're at now as American citizens. And there's not really much else to say about that. I do want to say, and we're about to get out of here, okay? Because like I said, this was all just to be a general overview. We're going to be reading much more articles on the Al-Aqsa problem. We're going to be reading much more articles on the intelligence failures, the casualties. Right now, it's about, give or take, 2,600, about 1,400 Palestinian and 1,200 Israeli who have been killed. We're going to be doing a lot more in-depth look in the future, but this was just a general overview. I want to actually get on camera here real quick so I can share with you guys. My camera is not even on. Ha! Imagine that. That's awesome. All right. Because I want to tell you guys something specifically, okay? And this is a somewhat rough truth that I think we need to hear, specifically us in the West, okay? One of these is going to be very much reliant on my religious beliefs. I understand that not everybody who watches this show shares them, but nevertheless, I feel the need to say it anyway. If you like this just for the news, obviously you can ignore this, but please don't. Another part of this is just going to be merely practical, okay? We'll get to the practical first. America is not invincible. America is not incapable of being attacked in this vile of a manner. Okay, Israel has a ridiculously powerful military. Conscription of every man and woman, barring very, very rare exceptions like mental handicap and those who go to yeshiva, right? And physical handicap, of course. They have, with the combined reserve forces and active duty forces at the moment, 600,000 troops, despite a population, a Jewish population at least, of 6 million. That means 10% of their population is soldiers. They have the most advanced missile self-defense system in the world in the Iron Dome. They have the most advanced intelligence network in the world via Mossad. And they were caught completely off guard, flat-footed and embarrassed by a bunch of dudes in Tacoma trucks shooting AK-47s in their tank top, yelling Allahu Akbar. What is my point? No nation should be getting complacent. We are living in a very weird time right now where international norms are shattering right before our eyes. We have had more coups since 2020 than in the rest of the 21st century combined. We have had threats to Taiwan's sovereignty from China in a more blatant a fashion than has ever occurred. We have had an intense conflict taking place in Ukraine. We have had an intense conflict taking place in Armenia that has led to the complete destruction of the Armenian enclave in Azerbaijan. And there are many other things that can be mentioned as well. The fact of the matter is, things are looking bizarre. It is breaking down, the status quo is breaking down at virtually every pressure point at the moment. Does that mean anything massive necessarily? No. It does mean that we as a country cannot be getting complacent. We cannot think of ourselves as invincible. We cannot think of ourselves well, there's two giant ponds, they ain't going to get me. Well, we got more aircraft than the rest of the world combined, so they ain't going to get me. Well, we got this, that, and the third, so they ain't going to get me. They could. They easily could. We have an unchecked border at the moment. We have tens of millions of illegal immigrants in the country at the moment. We have numerous refugees from the Middle East at the moment, fighting age men. Are they all going to be terrorists? No. Are most of them going to be terrorists? No. Are any of them necessarily terrorists? We don't know that. The answer could very likely be no. And we shouldn't obviously be mistreating people on the off chance that they might be. But we should be prepared for these things. Again, Israel, if any nation couldn't have had it happen to them, it was Israel. The modern day Sparta with the greatest intelligence network this side of George Orwell. And it happened to them, which means it could happen here. Okay? So be prepared, America, for the possibility that this takes place. Don't lose your humanity in the process. Don't become haters of those who may actually legitimately need a helping hand. Do we want to just kick all refugees and immigrants to the side? No. Should we get control of our border? Yes. The illegal immigration problem? Yes. Should we at least know where people are? Yes. But we need to elect officials who are prepared, because this can happen anywhere at any time without any warning. Okay? The second thing I would like to point out, and you guys need to remember, I am Jewish, I am a Zionist, I am a nationalist, I support Israel's right to exist, I support them, at least from a moral perspective, in this war. However, it must be noted that Israel is a nation which is flagrantly, hostily secular. Okay? Now, this is the part where I might lose some of my non-religious audience, but I feel the need to say it. I think one of the reasons this could be happening, potentially, is that we serve a real and a just and a jealous God who is not above punishing his own people when they do things like, I don't know, have an ongoing war for the last 70 years that puts millions of people in famine-like conditions, just as an example. Have one of the highest abortion rates in the entire world, just as an example. Have flagrant disregard for marriage norms, just as an example. Be a mass producer of pornography, just as an example. Be persecutors of their own Jewish brethren because they are Messianic, meaning Christian, or Karaite, meaning they only adhere to the Tanakh and not to the rest of the Old Testament. Israel does a lot of very evil things as a country, not just from a conservative's perspective, like all the religious stuff I just talked about with abortion and marriage and stuff like that, but just generally persecuting Messianic Jews, not even recognizing them as Jews, right? If we actually believe that we serve the same God of that Old Testament, he is not above judging people in the modern world. And newsflash for you, America does most of those same things. So we as a nation, and Israel as a nation, should be repentant. We should, as the Bible says, seek our sackcloth and ashes with an eye toward God, asking for mercy and repenting from the things which we are doing wrong. Otherwise, this will inevitably happen to us. I can guarantee it. I know it for a fact. Now, again, I know there are some of my audience who are not religious. I don't happen to know if any of you are watching this at the moment. How could he possibly know this as a fact? Well, I do. You can believe me or not believe me, but when it happens, you'll remember you saw this video. And with that, my friends, we're going to end this. Shalom to you all. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope it was edifying for you in some sense. I want to remind you to be watchdogs, to think like Neanderthals. Please do consider subscribing to the Blog Luddite blog. We're going to be doing an expose here on Mia Khalifa and the fraudulent takeover of the anti-porn industry, which she has currently enacted. So please do consider subscribing there. And I want to ask you guys the question, in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise? Shalom.